What happens when love becomes silence, and silence becomes rage? When the person who promised to cherish you treats you like a ghost in your own home? Tonight on Unfolded Enigmas, we dive into a story that will make you question everything you think you know about betrayal, humiliation, and the breaking point of the human spirit. This isn't just about infidelity. This isn't just about revenge. This is about what happens when someone pushes another person so far into the shadows that the only way back to the light is through shattered glass and spilled blood. Today we're exploring a case that shocked a quiet neighborhood in Portland, Oregon, and left everyone asking the same question: how well do we really know the people we love? October 15, 2019, 11:47 p.m. The sound of breaking glass echoed through the Maple Grove apartment complex, followed by a scream that neighbors would later describe as otherworldly. When first responders arrived, they found 42-year-old Marcus Chen lying motionless on the concrete walkway, his body twisted at an unnatural angle, blood pooling beneath his head. Above him, a second-story window gaped open like a wound, jagged glass teeth catching the streetlight. Inside apartment 2B, they found 29-year-old Jessica Walsh standing in her living room, 7 months pregnant, holding a pair of fabric scissors still dripping with blood. She didn't run, she didn't hide, she didn't even put the scissors down. She just looked at the officers with eyes that had seen too much and whispered 5 words that would haunt everyone who heard them. "I wanted him to remember." But to understand how Jessica Walsh, a soft-spoken kindergarten teacher beloved by her students and colleagues, became someone capable of such violence, we have to go back to the beginning. We have to understand the slow, methodical way that love can transform into something unrecognizable. Jessica met Marcus in the summer of 2016 at a coffee shop near the elementary school where she taught. He was 39 then, working as an IT consultant, recently divorced, and carrying himself with the confidence of someone who had learned hard lessons about life. She was 26, optimistic, and still believed that good people attracted good things. Their first conversation lasted 3 hours. He told her about his failed marriage, how his ex-wife had been impossible to please, and how he was finally ready for something real. Jessica saw a man who had been hurt and was determined to love him back to wholeness. They moved in together after 8 months of dating. Jessica gave up her cozy studio apartment and moved into Marcus's place in Maple Grove. A decision she made not because she was impulsive, but because it felt like the natural next step. Marcus seemed stable, mature, and ready for commitment. He talked about marriage, about children, about the life they would build together. For the first time in years, Jessica felt like she was exactly where she belonged. The changes started small. Marcus began making comments about Jessica's friends, suggesting they were childish or dramatic. He convinced her that her colleague happy hours were a waste of time, that she should focus on their relationship instead. When Jessica's sister called for their weekly catch-up sessions, Marcus would sigh loudly or make pointed comments about how some people can't seem to function without constant attention. Gradually, Jessica found herself making excuses, canceling plans, and choosing staying home over maintaining the relationships that had once anchored her. Marcus took control of their finances under the guise of being practical. He was older, he earned more, and he had experience managing money from his first marriage. Jessica's teacher salary was modest, and it seemed logical to let him handle the bills, the savings, and the major decisions. But what started as financial partnership slowly became financial dependence. Jessica's paycheck was automatically deposited into their joint account, which Marcus monitored closely. When she wanted to buy something beyond groceries or basic necessities, she had to ask. When she questioned expenses or wanted to discuss their budget, he would become condescending, explaining things to her like she was one of her kindergarten students. The emotional distance grew gradually. Marcus would come home from work and barely acknowledge Jessica's presence. She would ask about his day, and he would respond with one-word answers while scrolling through his phone. When she tried to share stories from school or talk about her students, he would interrupt with work calls or suddenly remember urgent emails he needed to send. Dinner became a silent affair. Evenings were spent in the same room but worlds apart, Jessica grading papers while Marcus disappeared into his laptop or played video games with noise-canceling headphones. Jessica began keeping a journal, not because she planned to document abuse, but because writing helped her process the growing sense that she was disappearing. She wrote about feeling invisible in her own home, about how Marcus could sit 3 feet away from her for hours without making eye contact. She wrote about the way he would respond to her questions with irritation, as if her very voice was an inconvenience. Most painfully, she wrote about how she had started questioning her own worth, wondering if she was being too needy, too demanding, too present. The first betrayal came in the spring of 2018. Jessica found text messages on Marcus's phone while looking for a contact number he had asked her to find. The messages were from someone named A, and were unmistakably intimate. Late-night conversations about missing each other, about secret meetings, about how complicated everything was. When Jessica confronted Marcus, he didn't deny the affair, but he managed to make her feel like the villain for snooping through his phone. He said the relationship meant nothing, that it was over, and that her lack of trust was the real problem in their relationship. Jessica forgave him because she believed that's what love required. She convinced herself that his affair was a symptom of problems they could solve together. She suggested couples counseling, date nights, weekend getaways. Marcus agreed to counseling but attended 3 sessions before declaring it pointless and refusing to continue. He made minimal effort for a few weeks, bringing home flowers once and taking her to dinner twice, before settling back into the pattern of benign neglect that had become their norm. By early 2019, Jessica was pregnant with their first child. She had hoped that starting a family would bring them closer together, that becoming parents would give Marcus a reason to be present, engaged, and committed. Instead, the pregnancy seemed to give him permission to become even more distant. He complained about her morning sickness, her fatigue, and her changing body. He made jokes about her emotional state, dismissing her concerns about their relationship as pregnancy hormones. When Jessica tried to involve him in preparing for the baby, choosing names, or setting up the nursery, he would defer everything to her, saying she was better at that stuff anyway. The isolation during pregnancy was devastating. Jessica's body was changing, her emotions were heightened, and her need for connection and support was greater than ever. But Marcus treated her pregnancy like an inconvenience, something happening to her that affected him peripherally. He continued his routine of late nights at the office, weekend golf games, and solo evening activities while Jessica spent hours alone, planning for a baby that felt like hers alone. The second betrayal was different. It wasn't discovered through snooping or suspicious behavior. Marcus simply stopped hiding it. In the summer of 2019, when Jessica was 6 months pregnant, Marcus began staying out later, coming home after midnight, and sometimes not coming home at all. When Jessica asked where he had been, he would give vague answers about work drinks, or helping a friend. His clothes smelled like unfamiliar perfume. His phone was constantly buzzing with messages he wouldn't check in front of her. Jessica felt like she was losing her mind. She was carrying their child, managing their household, and trying to hold together a relationship with someone who seemed to have already moved on. She found herself checking his social media obsessively, looking for clues about where he was and who he was with. She started driving past his office to see if his car was really there when he claimed to be working late. The woman she had been, confident and self-assured, had been replaced by someone she didn't recognize, someone desperate and suspicious and afraid. The third betrayal was the one that broke her. On October 10, 2019, 5 days before everything changed forever, Jessica was cleaning their bedroom when she found a shoebox hidden in Marcus's closet. Inside were printed photos, dozens of them, explicit and intimate. They weren't selfies or professional photographs. They were pictures Marcus had taken of women, clearly without their knowledge or consent, in various states of undress. Some were taken through windows. Others appeared to be taken with hidden cameras. All of them were violations of privacy and dignity that made Jessica's stomach turn. But it was the notebook underneath the photos that truly shattered her world. Marcus had been keeping detailed records of his encounters with different women, rating their performance, describing intimate details, and planning future conquests. He had assigned them numbers instead of names. He had written about Jessica, about her pregnancy, about how she had become boring and demanding. Most devastating of all, he had written about their unborn child as an anchor that he couldn't wait to escape. Jessica didn't confront Marcus immediately. She put everything back exactly as she had found it and spent the next 5 days existing in a strange, dissociative state. She went to work, taught her kindergarteners, graded papers, and prepared lesson plans as if nothing had changed. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. The woman who had spent 3 years making excuses for Marcus, who had forgiven affairs and accepted neglect, who had convinced herself that love meant enduring anything, was gone. October 15th started like any other day. Jessica taught her morning classes, attended a faculty meeting, and drove home through the early autumn rain. Marcus was already there when she arrived, sitting on the couch with his laptop, a beer on the side table, completely absorbed in whatever was on his screen. Jessica made dinner, the same routine they had followed for months. She set the table for two, called Marcus to eat, and watched him scroll through his phone between bites of food she had prepared. The silence at dinner wasn't unusual, but something about it felt different that night. It wasn't the comfortable quiet of a couple content in each other's presence. It wasn't even the strained silence of two people avoiding difficult conversations. It was the hollow quiet of two strangers who happened to share the same space, one of whom was carrying the other's child and had just discovered the depth of his contempt for her. After dinner, Marcus returned to the couch and his laptop. Jessica cleaned the dishes, folded laundry, and tried to grade papers, but the words on the pages blurred together. She found herself staring at Marcus, really looking at him for the first time in months. She studied his face, trying to find traces of the man who had talked to her for hours in that coffee shop, who had promised to love and protect her, who had convinced her to rebuild her life around him. She saw a stranger. At 11:30 p.m., Jessica walked to the kitchen and opened the drawer where she kept her craft supplies. Among the construction paper and glue sticks were a pair of fabric scissors she used for classroom projects. She picked them up, feeling their weight in her hand, testing the sharpness of the blade against her thumb. Then she walked back to the living room where Marcus was still absorbed in his screen. "I found your photos," she said quietly. Marcus looked up from his laptop with the expression of someone mildly annoyed at being interrupted. "What photos?" "The ones in the shoebox. And the notebook." For a moment, Marcus said nothing. Then he smirked, the same condescending expression Jessica had learned to hate over the past 3 years. "You were going through my stuff? Who are those women? Did they know you were taking pictures of them?" Marcus closed his laptop and set it aside, but he didn't stand up. He looked at Jessica with the patience of someone explaining something simple to someone slow. "Those women made their choices. I didn't force anyone to do anything. Some of those pictures were taken through windows. Some of them were taken without consent. You're being dramatic." Those 3 words, delivered in that tone of voice, were the spark that ignited 3 years of accumulated rage. Jessica had been called dramatic for expressing concern about his affairs. She had been called dramatic for wanting to spend time together. She had been called dramatic for asking questions about their relationship. She had been called dramatic for having emotions, needs, and expectations. She had been dismissed, minimized, and invalidated so many times that she had started to believe maybe she really was too much, too needy, too difficult to love. But standing there, 7 months pregnant with his child, holding evidence of his systematic violation of other women's privacy and dignity, Jessica finally understood that she wasn't dramatic. She was just awake. "I'm not being dramatic," she said, her voice steady and calm. "I'm being human." Marcus rolled his eyes and reached for his laptop again. "Can we deal with this tomorrow? I have work to do." That was the moment Jessica snapped. Not with screaming or crying or begging. She snapped with clarity, with purpose, with the surgical precision of someone who had finally stopped accepting the unacceptable. She stepped forward and brought the scissors down across Marcus's face, cutting a clean line from his jawbone to his cheekbone. He jerked backward, his hand flying to his face, blood seeping between his fingers. For the first time in their relationship, she had his complete attention. "You want to know what dramatic looks like?" Jessica asked, raising the scissors again. Marcus scrambled off the couch, backing toward the hallway, his eyes wide with something Jessica had never seen before: fear. Not of her, but of the consequences of his own actions finally catching up to him. "Jessica, stop. Think about the baby." "I am thinking about the baby," she replied, following him slowly. "I'm thinking about what kind of father you would be. I'm thinking about what kind of man I would be raising our child to respect." She struck again, this time across his collarbone, and Marcus stumbled backward into the hallway. The cut wasn't deep enough to be fatal, but it was deep enough to scar, deep enough to serve as a permanent reminder of the woman he had underestimated. Marcus turned and ran, but instead of heading for the front door, he ran toward their bedroom. Jessica followed, not chasing him but walking with the deliberate pace of someone who had waited years for this moment. She found him struggling with the bedroom window, trying to open the lock with hands slippery with blood. "The door is that way," Jessica said, pointing behind her. "You're insane," Marcus gasped, finally getting the window open. "No," Jessica replied. "I'm done." Marcus looked back at her one more time, seeing something in her eyes that made him choose the window over walking past her to reach the door. He climbed onto the sill and jumped. The sound of his body hitting the concrete below brought Jessica back to the present moment. She walked to the window and looked down at Marcus lying motionless on the walkway, then calmly walked to the phone and called 911. 911, "What's your emergency? My name is Jessica Walsh. I've just stabbed my partner, and he jumped out of our second-story window. We're at Maple Grove Apartments, Building B, Apartment 2B. You'll need an ambulance. Ma'am, are you injured? Are you safe?" "I'm fine." "He's not." When the police arrived, they found Jessica sitting calmly on her couch, the bloody scissors on the coffee table beside her. She didn't resist arrest. She didn't ask for a lawyer. She simply told the truth about what had happened and why. Marcus survived the fall, but barely. He had multiple fractures in both legs, 3 broken ribs, and a severe concussion. The cuts on his face and collarbone required extensive stitches and would leave permanent scars. He would spend months in physical therapy learning to walk again, and he would never fully recover his previous mobility. During the police investigation, officers searched Marcus's apartment and computer. They found hundreds of inappropriate photos of women, many taken without consent. They found detailed records of his sexual encounters, including ratings and degrading comments. They found evidence of multiple affairs, financial manipulation, and emotional abuse. The investigation led to charges against Marcus for voyeurism, harassment, and violation of privacy laws. Jessica was charged with assault with a deadly weapon, but the case became a lightning rod for discussions about domestic abuse, emotional manipulation, and the breaking point of human endurance. Her story resonated with thousands of women who recognized their own experiences in her 3 years of gradual erosion and systematic dehumanization. The trial began 4 months after Jessica gave birth to a healthy baby girl. She appeared in court each day with quiet dignity, never seeking sympathy but never apologizing for defending her own worth. Her lawyer argued that Jessica had acted in response to years of psychological abuse and manipulation, that she had been pushed to a breaking point that any reasonable person might reach under similar circumstances. The prosecution argued that violence was never justified, regardless of emotional provocation. They presented Marcus as a victim of unprovoked assault, focusing on his injuries and the premeditated nature of Jessica's actions. But the jury heard testimony from Jessica's friends and colleagues about how she had changed during her relationship with Marcus. They heard from the women whose photos Marcus had taken without consent. They heard about the financial control, the isolation, the systematic undermining of Jessica's self-worth. They heard about a pattern of behavior designed to break another person's spirit. Most powerfully, they heard Jessica's own testimony. She didn't claim to be a victim. She didn't ask for pity. She simply explained what it felt like to disappear in plain sight, to be treated like a ghost by the person who was supposed to love her most. She explained what it meant to discover that the father of her child viewed their baby as an anchor and her as a conquest to be raided and dismissed. "I didn't want to hurt him," Jessica told the jury. "I wanted him to see me. For 3 years, I tried everything I could think of to make him see me as a human being deserving of basic respect and dignity. Nothing worked. In that moment, with those scissors in my hand, I finally found a way to make him see me." The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, they found Jessica guilty of assault, but they recommended the minimum sentence with consideration for the extreme emotional provocation. The judge sentenced Jessica to 2 years in prison, suspended to time served, plus 3 years of probation and community service. Marcus chose not to testify at the trial, and he declined all requests for interviews afterward. He moved out of state shortly after his physical therapy ended, walking with a permanent limp and bearing scars that would never fully fade. Jessica served her community service teaching art classes at a women's shelter, helping other survivors of domestic abuse express their experiences through creative therapy. She raised her daughter as a single mother, building the kind of life she had always wanted but had been convinced she didn't deserve. 5 years later, Jessica published a memoir about her experience, donating all proceeds to organizations supporting survivors of emotional abuse. She became an advocate for recognizing psychological manipulation as a form of domestic violence, speaking at conferences and supporting legislative changes to protect victims. The case changed how law enforcement and the courts approach domestic violence cases involving emotional and psychological abuse. Jessica's story became part of training programs for police officers, social workers, and legal professionals, helping them recognize the signs of systematic dehumanization and understand why victims sometimes reach a breaking point. Today, Jessica works as an elementary school principal, raising her daughter in a home filled with laughter, respect, and genuine love. She never remarried, but she built a community of supportive relationships that honor her worth and celebrate her strength. Her daughter is growing up knowing that she deserves to be treated with dignity, that her voice matters, and that love should never require her to disappear. The scars Marcus carries serve as daily reminders of the woman he underestimated, the relationship he destroyed, and the consequences of treating another person as disposable. The permanent damage to his legs ensures that he moves through the world carrying the weight of his choices, unable to run from the truth of what he had become. Justice in this case wasn't found in the courtroom verdict or the sentence imposed by the judge. Justice was found in Jessica's refusal to disappear, in her insistence on being seen, and in her determination to build a life worthy of the respect she had been denied. Justice was found in the other women whose photos were discovered and who finally received validation that what happened to them was wrong. Justice was found in the legal and social changes that followed, making it harder for others to manipulate and dehumanize their partners without consequences. Some people still argue about whether Jessica's actions were justified, whether violence is ever an appropriate response to emotional abuse, whether her sentence was too lenient or too harsh. But those debates miss the deeper truth of this story: that every person has a breaking point, and that systematic dehumanization will eventually meet resistance. Jessica Walsh's story isn't just about one night of violence. It's about 3 years of systematic erosion, about the slow death of dignity, and about the moment when a woman decided that being seen was worth any price. It's about the difference between justice and revenge, between accountability and punishment, and between the letter of the law and the spirit of human worth. In the end, justice wasn't served by the courts or the legal system. Justice was served by Jessica's refusal to remain invisible, by her insistence that her worth was not negotiable, and by her commitment to ensuring that other women would never have to choose between disappearing and fighting back. The real victory wasn't in the suspended sentence or the legal precedent. The real victory was in Jessica discovering that she was worth defending, that her voice mattered, and that love should never require someone to become a ghost in their own life. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the relationships in your own life or the experiences of people you know, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Unfolded Enigmas. Share this story with others who might need to hear it, and remember that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, respect, and genuine love. Justice isn't always found in courtrooms or legal verdicts. Sometimes, justice is found in the courage to refuse to disappear, to insist on being seen, and to fight for the basic human right to be treated as worthy of love and respect. Thank you for joining me on Unfolded Enigmas. Until next time, remember that the most important mysteries to solve are often the ones hiding in plain sight.